This is Sustainability and Community Prevention with Scott Gagnon, who is a certified prevention specialist and the founder and lead consultant at Dorigo Empowerment Institute. And thank you so much, Scott, for being here and for sharing all of your wonderful knowledge with us.
All right. Yes. Good morning, everyone. Is it still morning? It is still morning, everyone. From Maine, I come to you from gray Maine, where it actually is sunny and not gray. So that's different because it's been very gray here for the past week or so. I'm really happy to be with you all this morning to talk about sustainability and community prevention. Um, just a little bit more about myself, just so you have the sort of my link to this topic area. So as mentioned, I am a certified prevention specialist. I've been in the field of prevention and behavioral health broadly for a while. My most recent role was as the regional director for SAMHSA, covering Region 1, so that's the New England states, so your neighbors to the north. As SAMHSA is being restructured and the regional offices are closing down, I've started up this new kind of consulting business to kind of continue my mission to really serve folks and help folks in the field of prevention do their work. But before actually SAMHSA and my previous role as director of a training organization, I was a coordinator of a DFC coalition, a drug-free communities coalition, in the Androscoggin County, Maine. And one of the things you had to do, if you've been a drug-free communities grantee or part of one of those, one of the things you have to do as a condition of the grant, but really as a best practice, is develop a sustainability plan. Because the whole idea with the DFC funding, it's 5 to 10 years of funding from the federal government to really get you up and running, your prevention coalition up and running, get trained up, build capacity to really address those issues in your community. And the vision of that program is always as sort of seed money, and you're working towards being able to sustain what you're doing in the community. So this is something very close to me and something I've actually had to go through in terms of creating and implementing sustainability plans. So there's a little bit of information about my company. If you want to learn more about that, there's a QR code there with a dinosaur, which will take you to the website to learn more about that. But really for today, really want to focus on kind of what we know around sustainability. There's been a lot of great research and best practices that have been developed over the years in our prevention field. So that's really my goal, is to kind of just walk you through what we already know about sustainability and how it works and how we can plan and implement that, but also try to sprinkle in just kind of my perspective on this and expertise kind of going through this work, and kind of myself and knowing kind of what you all are going through as leaders in your communities. So, and hopefully we can make this kind of interactive, but at your comfort level, if you want to put things in the chat or if you want to unmute and provide answers, like whatever you're comfortable with. But first of all, I want to kind of talk, just kind of setting the stage in terms of defining sustainability. And so for folks in the audience, if you think about sustainability in prevention, like what would you think of that helps kind of define that? And again, if you want to put that in the chat or unmute yourself and kind of share your thoughts on that. This is like Jeopardy. I'm going to reveal the answer. I'm not a good Alex Trebek, though. Oh, I can't. My camera's covering the chat box. What's that?
Longevity, maintaining something that you started, basically trying to
Yes.
keep it at the same level or improve.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Yes, definitely. Those are important hallmarks of sustainability for sure. Other thoughts on that? So this is the definition that comes from, this actually comes from SAMHSA has a great, and I have a link to this at the end of the slide deck, about a great overview of the strategic prevention framework. And they have a section where they talk about sustainability. And this is sort of the definition that they put in that guide, which is sustainability is the capacity of a community to produce and maintain positive prevention outcomes over time. To maintain positive outcomes, communities will want to sustain an effective strategic planning process, as well as those programs and practices that produce positive prevention results. Accomplishing these dual tasks requires the participation, resolve, and dedication of diverse community members and a lot of careful planning. So, um, a couple questions as you see that definition. What do you notice about what is included in this definition? Anything that kind of stands out for you in terms of what's included? Are there any words or phrases? Prevention outcomes, right? Yeah. Community. Dual tasks, yes. All right, how about what diverse? Yes, diverse is important piece of that. How about what do you notice that isn't included in this definition? Anything you notice that's not like there, or at least not directly? Money, funding, yes. That's I'm sure there's other things you could think of, but that's definitely the answer I was going for. So let me so so obviously in sustainability, resources is important, and we'll talk more about that later. But when it comes to sustainability, funding should be a focus, but not the focus, right? Um, and reasons for that. I mean, one of the reasons is if you're focused on sort of chasing dollars, as we sometimes talk about it, you can end up with prevention that's maybe a little disconnected. So if your goal is strictly money and not other aspects of sustainability, you may end up getting into funding sources that maybe take you a little bit astray from what you originally planned for in your community in terms of maybe disconnected from your original goals in terms of your original prevention outcomes that you're trying to focus, which also dovetails into this idea of mission drift or mission creep. Kind of walking astray from your original vision and focus of what you were trying to address in your community. The other thing is you could miss out on some opportunities to grow collaboration. And we'll talk more later when we get into sort of the action part of sustainability is, there can be situations where you may be the lead on a sustainability plan, but maybe there's an opportunity to work with another organization that has resources that connects to what you're focused on. So if you're focused on yourself, kind of doing all the grant writing and looking for all the funding sources, you may miss out on an opportunity to work with another organization that has linkages to resources, and there's some alignment there. Um, there's also the opportunity to sustain prevention through environmental strategies and policy change, which doesn't necessarily require funding or not as much funding, and can really be more durable in a lot of ways. So let's talk about why is it important to sustain an effective strategic planning process. One of the reasons is because prevention takes time, and it's something we know is a hallmark and something we always talked about in prevention. It's you don't always see results immediately. Sometimes it can take a year or more or 5 years. And so it's really important that we have an enduring um, initiative and program in our communities to make sure we work towards and continually work towards the goals that we set out. We know that substance misuse problems and priorities can change. There can be shifts in trends in terms of what's emerging. And so having, again, a sustained prevention alliance program and initiatives can really help, again, build in that durability to be able to adapt to those changing priorities. And also effective prevention requires collaboration. So so that means it's an effective planning process that can become a shared language. And again, having a sustained effort in that regard can help towards that. So let's talk a little bit about our friend, the strategic prevention framework, and how we can infuse sustainability throughout all steps of it. Because as we know, the strategic prevention framework, we have these 5 distinct steps and the 2 cross-cutting sort of guides, which includes sustainability. But the reality is we want to work both of those sort of guiding principles into all steps of our strategic prevention framework, because that's just going to help build the success and the capacity of our organization or our alliance to really to build those sustainable prevention systems. So first of all, thinking about a needs assessment, like how can we build in ideas of sustainability into our needs assessment process? So I mean, one of the first things we do is we set those long-term prevention outcome goals for the community. So they're sort of our guiding light of the work that we're doing in our community. That's really going to help having that common sort of standard goal that we're all focused on is really a really important part of sustainability. Establishing those collaborative relationships, particularly with data keepers. When we think about needs assessment, a big part of that is gathering data to be able to tell the story of what's happening in our communities. And so having established relationships with those keepers is going to help us for sustainability so they can continuously help us kind of monitor and tell the story of what's happening in our community with data, which is going to be an important part of a sustainability plan. It's also really in this needs assessment step is really where we can establish relationships with stakeholders who are going to be really important allies, not just in what we're planning and implementing immediately in sort of our initial work, but also again for those sustainability efforts, because we're not going to be able to do it alone as prevention professionals or as an alliance ourselves. We're going to really need those partnerships. Oh, data keeper is. Yeah. So when I think about data keeper, you think about it could be an epidemiologist at the state. It could be if you're looking for data like school survey data, like whoever collects and sort of publishes that data. If you want data on sort of public safety data, so maybe law enforcement entities, you may need data from colleges. So it's really those individuals in these different sectors that have the data that we need to help us kind of tell the story about what's happening in our communities. Next thing about capacity, how can we build in sustainability when we're looking at capacity? So first of all, intentional capacity building with a goal with weaving prevention into the community. So it's not just, building up the capacity of ourselves as prevention professionals, but how can we do that in the community? How can we raise awareness about the importance of evidence-based practices of prevention science and how we can address our substance use needs and priorities in our community? It really, building capacity really helps set up our organization and our ability to pivot and innovate as trends change, as sort of the landscape changes. Having strong capacity within our organization is going to make us again more durable and able to persevere through changes and trends. Um, Capacity building is also where we can promote public awareness and support for evidence-based prevention to really help kind of build that buy-in, not just understanding of prevention science and the importance of it, but to kind of help lay the groundwork for that buy-in that we'll need when we build and implement sustainability plans. Planning. So at the planning phase, a really important part of planning is to make sure, especially initially, that whatever we're planning for in our community around prevention has a right fit. So that means it's going to fit the local needs. It's going to fit our local capacity. So, making sure that whatever we want to do is a match with the capacity we have to implement it. And also that's going to fit our local cultures because we know that there's no one size fits all when it comes to prevention. There's different populations need different interventions and different programs. So we want to really make sure at the get-go that everything that we do is a right fit. And that's important for sustainability because again, buy-in is from our community, from our stakeholders is really important to get those partners and those resources you're going to need to sustain. And if we're running programs that don't really seem to fit with our community or fit with our capacity, it's going to be harder to rally that support that you need for your sustainability plans. And so that's really the big part of sustainability in the planning phase is making sure at the get-go everything you're doing is that right fit. And you can, again, that's another place where other parts of the SPIF are going to be important. So, in terms of getting data and feedback through surveys and things like that to make sure that what you're implementing is continuing to be a good fit with your community. We think about implementation. So how we implement our programs can really help build that momentum we need, right, to sustain and weave prevention into the fabric of our communities. So this is where we want to make sure we're actively engaging and working closely with community partners to deliver our evidence-based programs, looking for all those opportunities to bring different sectors into the fold to help us with that. Because again, it's momentum, it's buy-in that we're going to be able to build having a lot of partnerships. Um, Closely monitoring programs and improving the delivery is an important part of implementation. So we want to make sure that what we're rolling out is having the effect it's having, and then look at those opportunities to continuously improve. Because again, if we kind of have these really successful programs that we've built and we have the data and the information to back up the effectiveness of it, that's going to help with the buy-in to do the sustainability piece. And an important part of that is celebrating the small wins along the way. So that may be through media, local media, that may be through events, that may be through newsletters, but however we can kind of celebrate not just amongst ourselves as alliances and coalitions, but to share that success with the community. So we're not waiting until we get to a sustainability plan to toot our horns. Like we're tooting our horns along the way to can again build momentum and buy-in in the community. Evaluation is an important part of the strategic prevention framework, of course, and another place where we can really think about sustainability. So, a big part of evaluation is having those right process and outcomes, and outcome evaluation data that's going to allow, again, to help make sure we're doing those mid-course corrections and to build the framework and the groundwork for demonstrating the effectiveness of our programs. It also allows the opportunity to expand upon what's working. So as we're looking at data, we can find out, or our evaluation data, look at, those parts of what we're doing is working really well and kind of really lean into that, but also pare back maybe what's not working as well. And that can help us be effective with our resources. And again, linking back to the earlier slide, talking about sharing success, we want to look for opportunities to share the evaluation findings with our partners and the community to again build that momentum and buy-in to sustain the interventions and potentially expand them to other parts of the community, depending on kind of what we're implementing. Just make sure I'm not missing anything in the chat. And of course, as we know, in the center of our strategic prevention framework, right, we have cultural competence and cultural humility, along with sustainability. But in terms of when we think about cultural competence and cultural humility, well, that's one of our two guiding principles. This is another place where we can really be thinking about the role of sustainability. And so as we're weaving sustainability throughout our strategic prevention framework, we also want to make sure that we're infusing cultural responsiveness into each step of the SPIF, because that also helps build the foundation for sustainability. And that's partly through intentional and consistent engagement of stakeholders and members of diverse populations to help build a broad alliance. So we want to make sure as prevention professionals we're reaching all corners of our communities, but that's also going to help have all corners of our community help us when it comes to building our sustainability plans. If there's parts of our community that don't feel as supported or as reached through our prevention programming, it's going to be harder to get their support when we need to sustain our program. So it's not just the right thing to do to make sure our services are culturally responsive, but it's going to help build that strong, broad alliance in our communities. And thinking from a moral perspective too, also it's going to ensure that not only are we sustaining prevention, but we're sustaining prevention outcomes for everyone in our communities. Oh, I think I just saw something pop up in the chat here. Is it typical that a given community group are strong in all the areas, or is there uneven capacity, and how does that relate to working on sustainability? Yeah, I mean, especially as smaller coalitions, like we only have so much resources, right? So I think we always have room for improvement when it comes to capacity, and I think that's where again, continually monitoring our outcomes and what we're looking at can help with that. So we see that we're really strong, maybe with our school programs, but maybe not as strong with some of our maybe the policy work that we want to do. Then we know from a capacity perspective, we need to maybe shore up our capacity on doing more policy work. So that may be looking for opportunities to bring in presenters or technical assistants to kind of build that up. So but that's a good question. That harkens why we also need to make sure evaluation is really all parts of the spiff or worked into all parts of the spiff. But the evaluation part will really be important there to kind of be able to monitor where we need help with capacity. And again, using that example, if we know that we need a little bit more capacity building around policy, that impacts sustainability because we know that if we can enact some policy changes in our community, that is a good sustainability measure. So, for example, enhancing school policies to make sure that they're less punitive and more restorative. I mean, that could be a good sustainability strategy. All right. So, any questions or just comments or feedback on that in terms of, again, looking at how we weave sustainability throughout the strategic prevention framework? Um, Questions or experience with that anyone wants to share?
Well, the Municipal Alliance grant was reduced and continues to be, reduced in funding. And we have to get creative when it comes to sustainability in all the aspects of the spiff. You have to get creative and have an understanding of, the municipality's needs and how each one is very different. And that's where the creativity part comes in. So I think that, sustainability in every step is a perfect way to introduce it because I think sometimes people get stuck in like one or two areas. But if it's ingrained in the beginning and throughout, I think it doesn't become like such a hardship in the end. When you think about now I have to sustain it, it takes away the shock factor if it's ingrained in all aspects of it.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, that's really important, a part of that because I mean, most prevention organizations, coalitions, limited resources, right? So that we can never take on as much as we want to, and so, but if we start from the beginning, thinking about as we're creating and starting these programs or these initiatives, how are we going to do it now with the resources we have, but then always thinking about if we're on a 1 year grant or a 3 year grant or 5 year,
Yeah.
how will this live on? And again, if you have a good, you know, multiple sectors, everyone's gonna be able to think about that from a different way. So again, thinking about a school-based program, if you've got school folks on your coalition and, they can really weigh in on how potentially it could be integrated and parts of it could be taken up by the school that maybe your alliance was funding or staffing. So thinking about that from the beginning is really important. And there's always going to be, as prevention folks, we know that there's always going to be curveballs. There's always going to be things that happen that we don't anticipate. But if you start with some kind of vision or plan or idea of what sustainability is going to look like, that's going to be easier to craft something or to pivot with something that you already kind of have as a vision for sustainability versus kind of starting from scratch. So
Yes, and where we are now with the climate, it's so important to start from the very, very beginning. And here we are again. Like I use the Municipal Alliance, but I don't need to say any more on that topic. I'll just leave it right there, right? So
yeah.
but it was presented in such a nice way. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, I mean, certainly the climate now is challenging, right? And we think about COVID, and that time, that was a really challenging time where we were largely, I mean, I don't know with you all, but I know where I was working as doing as a prevention training and technical assistance provider, we were like 95% in person, 5% virtual. So we had to like immediately figure out how to flip that to 100% virtual. So that's just an example of like how we had, and then how to sustain that. Like we had to figure out how to do it initially, but then think about, okay, how are we going to sustain this? Because we know that the world is changing. Like even as we emerge on the other side of this phase of the pandemic, like learning, like the way people want to learn is going to change. So we need to do this now, but also think about how are we going to sustain it, not just from resource perspective, but from a capacity perspective, how we plan it, how we implement it, how we monitor it. So really, we had to go through all steps of the spiff to really be able to do that quick pivot and sustain that model. Any other reflections on that? I did have one more just kind of discussion question or sharing question if anyone feels comfortable doing that. Again, either the chat or you want to unmute yourself. Um, Sort of the question is if you have any experience in developing a plan to sustain a prevention program or initiative, and that's by your definition, how, if like however you define like how you work on sustainability plans. And I'd be curious to hear like what went well or or if you're in the middle of developing or implementing sustainability, what's going well and kind of what are some of the challenges you're running into around sustainability. And that could be anything. It could be like from your overall alliance, it could be from a particular program or part of a program that you're
I,
implementing.
I think there's two things I could share. One
Yeah.
is that when you try to apply for different grants, sometimes your programs, don't quite fit, even though you kind of get the connection. Maybe you either don't make it well enough or, some other program acts like a better fit and you don't get any kind of feedback back about, how you might look at it from a different lens, right? Because you only see it from the submission side. And the other kind of challenge is totally separate, and that's that a lot of the people that come into your alliance or that you surround yourself with, partner with, they've all got their own agendas as well. So when their needs come first and what's in it for them comes first, and they're not getting what they need, they pull away, and then those partnerships are gone. Whereas we find our long-term stay around people, you kind of keep making those connections and opening doors. But that, what's in it for me is not always evident to outsiders. So those are two of the major challenges that I've found over the many years.
Yeah, and especially that first one, I've gone through that myself, applying for grants. I mean, some places are good, like I think is the drug free community grant. Like I remember we had applied twice. The first, and they do provide some feedback, but there are other grants like local foundation grants I've applied for where it's like I thought this was really great, but it didn't go through, and I'm not exactly sure why. And so that is, I can definitely understand that challenge, and the other one you mentioned as well. That can be challenging for sure.
We've had some great programs that have come out of our partnerships, but sometimes, other ones didn't pan out. And, that just makes for a lot of fluidity, in your membership, which can sometimes be difficult because you don't always know what someone's looking for. And you try to have those discussions up front before they, I don't want to say join or, attend regularly. But sometimes it's hard to gauge, what are they getting out of it?
Yeah. And I mean, think about sustainability. I mean, that's an important piece too. I mean, just for the peopling aspect of our jobs, right, is really important in terms of sustainability. So it's one thing to attract people to join our alliances, but that's the other important part of that is to understand like not only the expertise they're bringing to the table, but what are their other aspects that they're bringing to the table that can either help us or, potentially have challenges here and there, and like just kind of staying on top of that and managing
Yeah.
those relationships.
Yeah, or were they only in it to see what they could get out of it?
Right. Yes.
It's
Yes.
happened both ways.
For sure. For sure. Any other reflection or things that folks want to share with their experience around sustainability, good and bad?
We have one raised hand. Oh,
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that.
it's
So,
gone now. We're good.
okay. All right. Well, if you have any other stories, feel free to put those in the chat. We'll move on to the next. So I want to propose this idea. Well, not a particularly new idea, but so we'll talk a little bit more about sort of the nuts and bolts of creating a strategic or a sustainability plan. But I think one of the other ways we can think about sustainability is through durability. And what I mean by that is, as prevention coalitions or as alliances, we tend to prioritize certain kind of risk factors or things that are happening in our community that we're addressing. So, for example, I was in the DFC coalition that I was in. One of the things that we were focused on was social access to alcohol. And so one of the ways we built sort of a durable, sustainable prevention initiative around this is having multiple programs, right? So we had one initiative to create social media campaigns to raise awareness around the issues of social access to alcohol, whether it's through older siblings, family members, things of that nature. Um, Doing parent education, right? Sessions either in schools or in other venues. Having an in-school curriculum with a parent component where we talk about social access to alcohol, and then working on school policies to reduce exposure or things that are happening in schools. So the durability part of this is as small coalitions with limited resources, can be a measure of sustainability because if we lose funding in one of them, so let's say we lose the funding or the capacity to run the in-school program, we still have these other aspects, these other initiatives that we're running. So we're still focusing on one of our core risk factors that we want to address in terms of social access to alcohol. So again, going back to the beginning, it's not just about money, right? I mean, money and resources are an important part of it, but it's also really a big part of it is how we kind of structure our prevention system. So we're building multiple strategies or multiple programs around, one of our key risk areas or focus areas. We kind of help build in sustainability by its nature. So if something, goes away for whatever reason, we still have some things that are going on. And so we lose that funding for that in-school program, we can continue these other things and then look for funding sources, partners, what have you, to maybe bring back the school program. So I think that's one way we can kind of think about sustainability is like how durable we're building our approaches and our strategies. I just want to see. So we're aligning this is in the chat. We're aligning with the mayor's wellness campaign to broaden our brush and not be pegged as that drug program, which is not perceived as needed in our community. Also hoping to get more people interested in the alliance as it fits in overall health and wellness. Okay, that's great. Yeah. Yeah, that can be a challenge too, right? In terms of like how thinking about how you kind of position your place in the community. I know that's something that we experienced as well. So thank you for sharing that. Another important way we can build durability is through policy change, right? So we can do media and information sharing and run evidence-based programs, but we also have some opportunities to instill some policy change in our communities. That's another way we can build in sustainability towards our long-term prevention outcomes. So thinking about marijuana as an example, through policy, we can build policy at multiple layers. So at a organizational level, we can work with our schools to make sure that we have restorative school policies versus punitive policies that have kids out of school and suspensions, expulsions, and things of that nature. So thinking more like diverting kids into some education programs versus out of school suspensions. We're thinking about at the community level, making sure when we're having community events, we have rules and policies that don't allow for marketing and branding of marijuana products at our events. I think having sort of a local, maybe even state level policies that look at outlet densities to limit how close together um, outlet densities are. So you think of, we have a community where we can stack these policy changes throughout these different levels of our community. That's a sustainable measure, right? Because once we have these policies in place, it's not need as much need for financial resources. It's going to be more resources of time, partnerships to kind of champion those policies and make sure that they continue on. So bigger kind of bang for our buck, if you will, if we can get these kind of policy changes. So that's another way we can build sustainability, enduring and durable sustaining sustainability towards our prevention outcomes. All right, next I'll go into sort of the elements and steps of developing a sustainability plan. But before I do, any questions that have come up for anyone? Comments? Well, let's talk about steps in developing a sustainability plan. Pulled from a resource that was originally developed by the Center for Applied Prevention Technologies, which was kind of before the PTDCs. So there's a great step-by-step, more in greater detail than I'll go through today, about creating and implementing a sustainability plan. So that's where a lot of this content comes from. So there's really important steps when it comes to developing a sustainability plan, and we'll go through each of these in detail. So first is some pre-planning, right? You don't just launch into building a sustainability plan. There's some kind of prep, right? You want to do before you go into that to make sure you have the right elements, if you will, the right ingredients, and the right folks at the table to do that important work. The next step would be to kind of do an inventory and to identify priorities. So an inventory of the programs and initiatives we have ongoing and to identify some priorities there. We want to complete a resource and feasibility analysis. So, there's a lot that we're doing as an alliance, as a prevention coalition. So one of the things we need to look at in terms of sustainability is matching the resources and the feasibility with what we're going to be able to continue and maintain. Partnerships and community buy-in is really important. So that means we need to make sure we have good communications plans. And then implementing our sustainability actions, of course, is an important step. So let's talk a bit more about all these in some more detail. So first, thinking about pre-planning. So an important part is going to be to understand sustainability basics. So thinking again about capacity of our alliance, do all of our partners have a good grounding in what we mean by sustainability when it comes to prevention? If not, then maybe we want to think about bringing in some education, or we can pull from some of the great resources that have been developed by SAMHSA, CADCA, by your PTDC, and other kind of parts of your prevention infrastructure to kind of help do some internal capacity building, because we want to make sure when we come to the table to develop these sustainability plans that we're all kind of speaking the same language and understand the concepts of what goes into sustainability planning. Going back to where we started, right? We want to make sure at the beginning we're integrating sustainability throughout the strategic prevention framework. So again, we're coming to the table already understanding the importance of sustainability and how it connects to everything that we do in our work. We want to be able to document lessons that we've learned as we've implemented and plan our prevention work across the strategic prevention framework. We want to be able to understand like what's worked well, what hasn't worked well. And we can document that in many ways. We can do it through reporting. We can do it through notes right at our meetings. We can do it through data, getting some kind of testimonies from folks that are either engaged in our work or recipients of our work. There's a lot of different ways we can do that. And then, of course, we want to bring together that sustainability planning team. And when we do that, we want to think about having certain perspectives at the table, right? Certainly, we want to have someone with good prevention science expertise at the table. research, right? Because we may need to research other models that we want to implement. We need to research grant opportunities, things of that nature. Budgeting is going to be an important part of that. So when we think about what we want to maintain and sustain, we are going to have, well, again, this is where funding will and resources will need to be a part of the story, thinking about what are we going to need to sustain what we want to sustain. Fundraising, so there's grants that we can apply for, but we may want to look at some fundraising programs that we want to develop in the community to help the community kind of buy in, if you will, to support what we want to continue. And then someone who's really strong with communications to be able to communicate with potential funders, with with the greater community, with new partners we need to bring to the table. And there's probably other folks you could think of as well that you'd want to have on the sustainability plan. But if you have these kind of 5 perspectives at the table, that's going to set you, with a great grounding to make sure that you have the knowledge, experience, and skills you need to develop a good, robust sustainability plan. So once we have all that in motion and at the table, we want to first start by doing that inventory and to kind of identify our priorities. So when we think about the inventory, it's our prevention programs that we are running and implementing. It's those processes that we've been going through to plan and implement our prevention initiatives, and also the outcomes. So taking an inventory of what did we set as our prevention outcomes? Are there any new outcomes that we've added to that? Making sure we have that kind of, that roadmap that we're working towards. Because again, we want to make sure that our sustainability plan is connected to our original vision, our original goals, and the original prevention outcomes that we had when we started this work. So when we're doing this, there's questions that we can be asking ourselves. So we want to be thinking about what is working well. There's probably some programs and processes that we're seeing better outcomes versus in others. And it's going to be important to have that information. What are things that we're still developing, are being refined? What are still works in progress? And then what isn't working? Are there some initiatives that we had, we really put our best efforts and we had great kind of energy, but for whatever reason, it's just not either clicking with our community. It's not quite a great fit. There's just something about this that's not quite working. So these are important questions, and this inventory will kind of give us a good landscape or of what we have to work with when we think about what that we're already doing right now, or do we want to carry forward in a sustainability plan. Thinking about our processes with the strategic prevention framework as part of this inventory. So we want to identify that those past processes that have helped our community complete the key tasks. We want to identify past processes that did not help our community complete those key tasks. So again, this is going to help us do some decision making about what carries forward and what we kind of leave behind as we develop our plan. And this will give us the opportunity to identify some new processes that will help us in our community complete the key tasks as we're moving forward. We also want to determine our alliance's level of responsibility. So, I mean, we're one entity that's working on this. We may have other entities that are connected or part of the work as well. And so we also want to make sure we have a good understanding of like, where are we the lead? Where are we a support in the work? So as we look at our interventions, questions, things that we want to be looking at, is we want to determine if it's achieving or making progress towards our desired outcome. So do we have that? So if we have logic models that we're using, we can kind of look for that line logic to make sure that what we're doing is connected to in meeting the outcomes that we set for ourselves. We want to determine if we are properly equipped with the staff, supplies, and space for each of our interventions. So looking at that capacity. We want to make sure we can determine the value amongst the community and community leaders of our interventions. And then determine our alliance's level of responsibility for that. And again, can we make that strong link between our efforts and the outcomes? Because the clearer the link is, the easier it's going to be for the buy-in. So just to kind of illustrate this, let's say we have 3 interventions that we're running. So intervention 1, we have great amount of evidence, both in terms of the effectiveness, the evidence of our capacity, and the evidence of our of community support. But our role in it is not we're not the lead on this, right? So there's questions about the role of Alliance with this, as opposed to intervention two, which is sort of the flip side of that, where we don't have a lot of evidence of effectiveness, that we have the right capacity for it or the right level of community support. But we have our group has a strong role with that versus intervention three, where you're ticking all the boxes. So this is gonna, when you look at this inventory, can help you make those decisions on what you want to carry forward. So you may be putting a lot of effort and or you may have a lot of great, influence on intervention two, but if we don't have a lot of evidence in terms of effectiveness and community buy-in, it may be something we want to leave behind because it's a lot of effort into something that's, for whatever reason, not quite clicking. So then once we kind of take that inventory, we want to prioritize what do we want to sustain? And so we want to come up with some categories for that. So we may want to look at the impact of, and these are categories that were suggested by the Center of Civic Partnerships. So looking at impact, looking at the community support for our interventions, the resource potential, and whether or not it's still a need. So we kind of develop these criteria, and then we can kind of go through our inventory and kind of make decisions. So if something doesn't have the impact that we want, if it doesn't have the community support we want, that may be something we decide that it's not going to go into our sustainability plan. So we also want to set goals for a sustainability plan. So that's an important part of this, right? So we want to make sure, as we develop those goals, we want to make sure they're informed by data, that they're realistic, and that they're shared, right? And then with that, we can write some concrete sustainability objectives. And so we can frame that in ways that they're essential, specific, and realistic. So here's a couple of examples of what that could look like. So we may have one sustainability goal to maintain some MOUs. And so we have a goal of a certain number of those. Sorry, MOU is a memorandum of understanding. So that may be something you have, let's say you're running a school-based program and you have MOUs with, say, 12 schools to implement this program. So essentially it's agreements, right? It's about, you want to maintain, you have a certain number of agreements with different community entities to implement a certain kind of initiative. Get a little short on time, so I want to make sure I get through these next couple of pieces. So next, as we have our priorities, right, and we have our goals, we want to look at our resource and feasibility analysis. We want to make sure that what we're prioritizing, we can figure out and plan the resources we're going to need to implement that. So we need to identify those resources, and they are fiscal, but they're also the human and organizational. So we need the funding, but we also need to make sure we have the human capacity and the organizational support to implement and to sustain those programs. And that may be where we want to identify some new partnerships to bring to the table to help to sustain the program. And then when we think about support, we also want to think about not just the fiscal support, but in-kind support. Or so there are things that can be donated that can help maintain our programs. And then we want to look at the feasibility of potential funding. So there may be something where we have a great plan, but we can't really identify a lot of good funding sources for that are a match, to go with that earlier comment. So that may be something that kind of goes lower on our priority list because of that. And so from that, we can create that sustainability budget to figure out how are we going to fund and support what we want to move forward. So when it comes to fiscal strategies for what we're going to need, so one of our fiscal strategies may be full or partial adoption of a strategy by a community partner. So maybe they can bring on a part of what we want to sustain. Look at some systems and policy change that can be integrated into an existing structure. We also want to make sure we're looking at a variety of fundraising strategies. So not just grant opportunities, but are there some donations or fundraising that we can do, but again, also in-kind contributions. So long-term fiscal strategies may be looking at, maybe includes getting a line item being written into a line item of an existing budget, promoting the adoption of programs and services by other organizations, institutes in our community. Changing community guidelines can be another long-term strategy for maintaining the sustaining prevention outcomes. Short-term strategies could be in-kind support, applying for some short-term, like time-limited grants, and then raising funds through donations. So examples of that could be, say you have a program that's written into a state's block grant funding potentially. I mean, that's an example of being written into a line item. Maybe there's an education program you're running in a school that you've been funding, but the school is going to be able to adopt it and write it into their budget. So that could be a long-term strategy. Short-term fiscal strategies, an in-kind example could be a hospital donating staff and space for an initiative. A one-year grant from a local foundation could be a short-term example. A GoFundMe campaign for fundraising. So when you have all that, next you need to make sure you have a good communication framework, right? And so that's because you have different folks you're going to need to communicate with to move things forward. So you want to identify those sectors that you're going to want to engage. So that includes potential funders, the community members you need to build support, potential partners to adopt the programs. And then you also need to, and for each of these, you're going to need to consider how to tailor the message to make sure it's going to resonate with your audience. So that's where you can create case statements, and there's this is an example of how I'm sorry, you can structure that. So have a title, what your hook is, how you're going to draw people in, talking about your goals, your capacity, your needs, what you've accomplished so far to kind of, show that you have the experience you need to continue and sustain that, and then how they can get in touch with you. And then lastly, right, you need to do the implementation. So you want to create an action plan where you're going to have your sustainability goals, recap and state what your resource strategies are going to be to kind of get the fiscal and community support you need to move things forward. Who is the lead on different tasks, whether it's your alliance or partners that are taking the lead on that? What are those tasks that need to be completed? And then what are those resources you're going to need to implement your fiscal strategy for your plan? And then, of course, as any good any kind of implementation plan needs, you're going to want to have timelines for those tasks. So here's an example of what that could look like there. So as you go along, what's really important is to make sure you take time to provide updates on how things are going, respond to changes as things develop, and importantly, celebrate the successes that you're having along the way. I'm out of time, but I did include a couple of slides. If you are looking at doing grant writing, some pro tips I have around my experience writing grants, some do's and don'ts. So you'll have the slide deck to look at those, but just kind of some pro tips kind of around that. So just kind of wrap us up with the last couple of minutes. When it comes to sustainability, remembering that our prevention outcomes can take time. So sustainability plans are really important, and to really plan that from the beginning and weave it throughout our strategic prevention framework. And with that structure and that intentionality, it will really help us create that roadmap to make sure from the beginning and ongoing, we really get to where we want to go with our prevention initiatives and our work. So with that, I think I've left you 2 minutes for any last Q&A.
Thank you so much. I'm going to,
Let me stop.
let's see. There we go. Hi. That was excellent. Thank you so much. I want to ask one thing. Well, I did tell folks we'll share a copy of PDF of the slides so they can take in all that information. And is this true that all of the things that you discuss can happen on small levels? Like when you think about a feasibility evaluation, like that can be a couple of columns on a whiteboard with people who are involved.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any one specific structure, really. I mean, I think that probably lots of folks have developed different models, and the guide I have at the end, they'll have a specific structure for how to do it. But I think it's whatever's going to work for the group. I mean, simple
Right.
is definitely good. It's because in the end, what you're trying to do is, here's what we've been doing, here's what we think is possible to continue, and here's why. I mean, that's really at the end of the day what you're doing is, in a perfect world, you'd love to sustain everything that we're doing, but not everything's going to be feasible, whether it's available funding, policy changes, what have you. But at the end of the day, yes, a simple notes on a whiteboard, and it could do it for sure. And I think that dovetails another important point is they don't bite off more than you can chew. Like again, ultimately, we'd love to, like when I was at the DSC, we wanted to continue everything, but ultimately we prioritized like maybe 3 or 4 things out of the 10 things that we were doing, because we knew that that ticked all the boxes, was feasible. We could identify the resources, we could identify the partners, and it still was connected to the goals that we had written into our DSC grant.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank
Good day,
you.
Bye.
everyone.